or to write in one key. Now, like I said, this is very limiting. This is very restricting. I'm putting these 3 rules on you, saying you have to start here, you have to end on this, and you don't really want to be writing your own soulful, emotional music with these kind of rules in place. But I really do think this is a good place to start at least getting something that's musical. Ultimately, in a perfect world, you go sit down with your guitar and your emotions just pour out and your message comes out through your music. But you can't count on that. That's not something you can rely on. And when those moments don't happen, when you don't find that inspiration, and when things don't just click in place, you kind of have to just brute force your way through things. And to just write something, whether you like it or not, just get something out there, and then maybe later on that will actually inspire something. Or maybe that's where the idea starts and you change it and modify it from there. But you really have to expect that songwriting isn't going to always be this natural process where, you know, the waves come to you and you see the music and it just expresses itself instantly through. I mean, that does happen, and those are magical moments, and those are probably going to be your best songs when it's effortless. But that's like, for me personally, that's like 5% of my songwriting, just as that effortless, thoughtless process. 95% of the other parts of it is just brute forcing my way through things that I think might work, and then finding something that kind of works, and then later on, the idea really strikes, and the inspiration strikes, and I can just throw away all my mechanics and my rules, and I can just do what I'm hearing, and do what I really want to do. So there's the very basics of it. Hopefully you get the idea that this is simple stuff. I mean, you really don't need to know much theory to start writing songs in different keys. What I suggest you do is write in every key. Write a song in E today, write a song in F tomorrow, write a song in F sharp the following day, just so you really get an idea of, you know, what each one of those keys looks like on your guitar, what they look like on your piano, if you're a piano player. If you do EDM, or if you're interested in writing music on a computer, try taking the same stuff and programming in these chords as strings or synthesizers. It's very important to practice this stuff by using it, by writing with it. I mean, it should go without saying. That's how you get better at writing music, is by writing more music. Now, a lot of my favorite songs go way past this bread and butter diatonic chord, only 6 chord choices. A lot of my favorite songs leave the key, and they do interesting things that break the rules. But a lot of times when you break the rules, there's even rules for how you break the rules. So the next step for you, if you want to take this to the next level, is to start exploring secondary dominant chords. And those are chords that are outside of the key, but they will take you to chords that are in your key. And you can also start looking into borrowed chords, which are chords that come from the parallel modes of the key that you're in. So you would want to know about your modes before you dive into that, but that will give you access to way more chords than just the 6 that I stuck you with today. Also keep in mind that songs can change keys. So you don't have to just write a song in the key of C major and keep it there forever. You're allowed to change keys. You're allowed to modulate in the middle of a song. So just some ideas of taking this past this very, very restrictive rules that I've given you here today. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and more importantly, I hope you realize that songwriting is actually something that anyone can do. They just have to learn the rules and practice a little bit. Then once you've learned those rules and practiced, you're free to go crazy and put your own spin on things, put your own style on things, and really make it yours. If you like this video, please subscribe, like, all that good stuff, and I will plan on seeing you soon.
сейчас я чувствую себя более-менее нормально, как-то. Знаешь, как будто вот не могу, да, когда вздохнул, как-то вдохнуть, да. Вдохнуть. Свежий, не знаю, витамин Сью какой-нибудь. Ну, смотри, я вот сейчас потратил анную сумму, да, большую часть на ну, может, просто пока, потому что никто не видит, не смотрит. Надо понимать себя просто. А что не платишь ничего? А, да. Развивайся давай, развивайся давай. А, ну. Наоборот, наоборот. А, ну, понял. А, вот это он меня ввел, да. Да нет, это есть он, да.
You want a catchy melody? I got you. You want a happy melody? I got you. Click below to get access to thousands.
For a very long time, I thought that writing music was one of those things you're either rules, I can literally just guess at anything and get a great sounding chord progression. Here's what I mean. I'm starting on 1. Pick any note between 1 and 6.
Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. Has anyone ever thought about how E is the only note that's in the major scale of all 7 white keys? That's the beginning of a post made by Kieran Ridge to a music theory Facebook group earlier this year, and barring some extreme pedantry about note names, it's absolutely true. You can pretty easily double check that if you've got a piano handy. I don't know about you though, but despite having over a decade of piano experience, I had never noticed, and judging by the replies to Ridge's post, I'm not the only one. And on the surface, it seems really weird. Why would this happen, and more importantly, what's so special about E? Well, let's find out. I think the first question we need to answer is just, like, who cares? I mean, first of all, the major scale has 7 notes, which means every note's going to be in 7 different major scales. The 7 that E belongs to happen to be based on the 7 white keys on a piano, but that layout is just for convenience. There's no functional difference between the white keys and the black keys, except that the white keys never recorded little black submarines. It's all just labels, and from a theory standpoint, those labels don't really mean all that much, so any property that's inherent to the white keys has to just be a coincidence, right? Well, no, not quite. It's true that for the most part we can treat white keys and black keys as identical, and as a music theorist I do that all the time, but there is one thing that sets the white keys apart. They're the notes of the C major scale. This, again, rarely matters because the specific key you're working in rarely matters, but in this particular case it means we're looking at a sort of scale-based fractal. We're building major scales off all the notes of the major scale, which means this property might not be quite so arbitrary after all. To demonstrate, let's try it somewhere else. If we take D major, and then build a new major scale off each of these notes, they'll all look pretty different, but every single one will contain F sharp. Again, you can pretty easily confirm that yourself. In fact, if you do this with any major scale, you'll find that the shared note between all the secondary majors you can build off it will always be the 3rd note of the parent scale, which lets us answer our initial question. Why is E in every white key major scale? Because the white keys are the notes of C major, and E is the 3rd note in that key. Cool, episode over. Bye! Okay, maybe we're not quite done yet. After all, this isn't really an answer, it's just kicking the can down the road a bit, but at least now we found a better question. What's so special about the 3rd note? And this is where theorist Ian Ring picks up the banner and runs with it. I've talked about Ring before on this channel. He's the guy who runs the database of scales that I use for my random scale challenge videos. He's also in that Facebook group that Ridge posted to, and he decided to do a pretty thorough analysis of the concept, which he dubbed Ridge tones in honor of their discoverer. The person who discovered them. This gives us an even more precise question to ask. Why is the 3rd note of the major scale a ridge tone? Is it just a coincidence, or is there something more meaningful going on here? Well, I don't believe in coincidences, at least not in music theory, so let's take a closer look. We said that in D major the ridge tone is F sharp, but let's confirm that by making a list of all the major scales that F sharp is a part of. Obviously there's F sharp major where it's the root, then there's E major where it's the major 2nd, D where it's the major 3rd, and moving on, in C sharp it's the perfect 4th, B is the perfect 5th, A the major 6th, G the major 7th, and then we're back to F sharp again. So what does this accomplish? Well, if we take these notes and treat them like a scale, then suddenly we have what's called F sharp Phrygian, which is kind of like F sharp minor, but with a lowered 2nd. This tells us something pretty important. The list of roots of all the major scales that contain a given note is the same thing as a Phrygian scale built off that note. The two groups are equivalent, which means that any property of one is also a property of the other. Now we can compare like with like. Major and Phrygian are both scales, so we can just do some scale theory to them. We don't have to worry about those weird nesting pitch collections we were building earlier, we just have to look for connections between major major in Phrygian, which lots of people have already done for us. We haven't solved the problem yet, but we've managed to move it into familiar terrain. So are there any connections between major and Phrygian? Yeah, there's a lot. They're extremely related scales, but for our purposes, we only actually care about two things. The first is that they're what's called inversions of each other. Phrygian is just a major scale turned upside down. Like, to build major, we start with a root, then go up a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And if we wanted to build Phrygian instead, we could start on a high root, then go down a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. It's the same interval pattern, the only difference is which direction it's going. And this makes sense in the context of our problem. In order for F sharp to be in any given major key, it needs to be a major scale interval above that key's root, or put another way, the root needs to be a major scale interval below F sharp. That leads us to a crucial observation. In order to find all the major scales a note belongs in, we just have to build an upside down major scale descending from that note, and as it turns out, upside down major is right side up Phrygian. But having an inversion isn't enough to give you a ridge tone. Every scale has an inversion. That's how inversions work. No, in order to fully explain what's happening here, we need to turn to our second connection. Major and Phrygian are modes. Modes are scales that share all the same notes, but treat a different one as the root, so if we take D major and F sharp Phrygian, we see they both have F sharp, they both have G, they both have A, and so on. The only difference is what note they start on. This gives us the final piece of the puzzle. We know that the roots of all the major scales that contain F sharp form the notes of F sharp Phrygian, and we know that the notes of F sharp Phrygian are equivalent to the notes of D major, which means that by simple deductive reasoning, the roots of all the major scales that contain F sharp form the notes of D major. And now we finally have a satisfying answer. The major scale contains a ridge tone because its inversion is one of its modes, so E is in every white key major scale because it's the root of the Phrygian or upside down major scale that shares all its notes with C major. And once we've got that, we can even apply this to other scales. For instance, melodic minor inverts to a scale called Dorian flat 2, and it turns out that Dorian flat 2 is the second mode of melodic minor, which means that this scale also has a ridge tone. If you build a melodic minor scale off any note from D melodic minor, for instance, you'll always wind up with an E. But this is kinda hard to And it turns out that Dorian flat 2 is the second mode of melodic minor, which means that this scale also has a ridge tone. If you build a melodic minor scale off any note from D melodic
Чё иди нафиг. Наоборот, значит, наоборот. Да наоборот. Наоборот, так вот это и есть она. Вот это.
Melodic minor, for instance, you'll always wind up with an E. But this is kinda hard to search for. You have to invert the scale, then check it against each of the modes to see if you can find a fit. Fortunately, Ring found an easier way, but to understand it, we'll have to switch from staff notation to clock diagrams. Sideways did a video on these a while back, which I'll link in the description, but real quick, they work like this. We draw a circle out of 12 little circles, each representing a different note in the scale. This top one is the root, then going clockwise we have the minor second, minor third, and so on. Next, we just fill in all the circles that represent the notes we're using, and boom, we've got a scale. For example, major's clock diagram looks like this, and if I just draw a dotted line through it, connecting the major second to the minor sixth, you may notice something interesting. The bottom half is a reflection of the top half. All the same dots are filled in. The line is behaving as a sort of mirror, which means that starting on the root and going clockwise is exactly the same as starting on the reflection of the root and going counterclockwise. And hey, would you look at where the root reflects to in major? It's our old pal, the third. That's right, being across this mirror line from the root is the same thing as being a ridge tone, so instead of messing around with inversions and modes, we can just look for scales with reflection symmetry. This all follows pretty directly from the stuff we've already talked about, but I'll leave the full explanation as an exercise for the viewer. Or you could just read Ring's article. And some scales even have multiple reflections, which means multiple ridge tones. As an extreme example, take the whole tone scale. Here, every note is a whole step away from each of its neighbors, making it the same pattern all the way through. Thus, the whole tone scale inverts to the whole tone scale, and every mode of the whole tone scale is also the whole tone scale, so every note of the whole tone scale is a ridge tone in the whole tone scale, and I promise this is the last time I'm gonna say whole tone scale. Scales with multiple ridge tones are pretty rare though. Heck, most of them don't have any. Only about 15% of 7-note scales have the necessary symmetry, which makes this yet another on the long list of rare and exciting set theory properties that major happens to possess. What a good scale. So where does that leave us? Well, obviously I'm excited about the property itself, but what I really love about this is that it all came from some idle musing about key signatures. Ridge noticed a silly little property and shared it not because it was obviously groundbreaking, but because it seemed interesting. Music theory doesn't always have to be about grand models that probe at the deepest levels of musical meaning. Sometimes it can just be fun. It turns out that ridge tones are connected to some pretty serious scale theory, but even if they weren't, isn't it just cool that E is in all the white key major scales? I think it's cool. Everything else is just a bonus. Anyway, that's it, but before you go, you may have noticed that this video doesn't have a sponsor. That's because I'm trying to cut back on how many of those I do. I talked about this in my latest update video on my side channel, but the short version is that if most of my income is coming from sponsors, then my financial incentive isn't to make good music theory videos, it's to sell you products. And they're good products. I do genuinely like the things my sponsors do, but I'm a music theorist, not a salesperson, and the more I focus my energy there, the less I have to spend on the things I want to make. 12-tone is my full-time job though, which means to keep the lights on I do have to get that income from somewhere, so I figured I'd use this opportunity to remind everyone how valuable Patreon support is. Even $1 a month helps, and you get to help pick the songs we analyze. Get ready for next week's, by the way, it's gonna be a good one. Plus, I've set some goals over on Patreon to let me reduce the number of sponsors I do per month in a sustainable way. So yeah, if you can afford it, there's a link to my Patreon page in the description, and I'd really appreciate your support. But as always, if you can't afford it or just don't want to, that's fine too. 12 Tone's free on purpose. You don't owe me your money. And hey, thanks for watching. Normally I plug my Patreon here, but since I just did that, here's some links to my social media accounts instead. Follow me on Twitter. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.
Hi, I'm Sean Levine. I'm a writer, an artist, an editor, and a creative writer.
Полет. Что такое?
Вообще я нашла работу через месяц после выпускного. Поначалу действительно получала только отказы, либо игнор полный моих обращений. Рассчитывала примерно на это, что я останусь на прежней работе, но, возможно, найду подработку.